Hello, Bio One people. How are you? Okay, by now, we finished test 2 and we're getting into genetics. We're a little off, but it's okay. This will work out. So we've talked about DNA, we talked about biotechnology, we talked about mitosis, meiosis. I love this chapter, chapter 7. This is talking about genes and inheritance. So what about those chromosomes? What about those genes and what's actually happening? And specifically, how is it expressed? How do we see it? So, you probably heard of dominant and recessive. So what is that? And how does that carry out? How does it go from generation to generation to generation? So genes, those coding sections on the DNA, inheritance, how they're passed on from generation to generation. It says family resemblances and how traits are inherited. I love this picture. Why do I love this picture? What are we looking at? They're identical twins, right? So they have identical DNA. Their genes are identical, okay? So we're talking about the genes and what do they code and how do they interplay with one another. All right. So family resemblance, your mother and your father contribute equally to your genetic makeup. So imagine if this is the mom and this is the dad and here are the kids. How do they give their trait to their babies? So that's what we're talking about. And in this chapter, the author really likes to give you examples, how a single bad gene can make you smell like rotten fish. What? Yes, some people, it's a genetic disorder. So it says inheritance of genes. Okay, so we're kind of going back to meiosis, but now applying it to traits. So imagine mom is diploid. So mom got a pair of chromosomes from her dad, and a pair of chromosomes from her mom, right? So she would have a gene for a trait from her mom, a gene for a trait for her dad, right? This guy, same thing. He's diploid. He got a pair of genes from mom, a pair of genes from his dad. So it could be a gene from his mom, a gene from his dad. Okay. Now, through meiosis, when she goes to making eggs, one of her genes will be in one egg, one of her genes will be in another. When he goes to making sperm, it's haploid, only carries one of his genes or one of his genes. And we talked about meiosis and how things are passed on. Then, So it says meiosis produces human gametes with just one copy of each chromosome, and that's one copy of each gene. Okay, fine. Then, if fertilization is going to happen, so if the egg from this woman and the sperm from this man get together, now the future baby would be diploid again. The child inherits one set of chromosomes from each parent, and that's 2 copies of the gene. So this whole chapter is about the genes and how do they interplay and how do they manifest in the child. So they talk about, for example, usually we talk about dominant and recessive traits. Here, this one, fish odor syndrome, this is a real thing. It says normal version of the gene, and it says defective version. So let's pretend mom carries a defective version. Let's say dad carries a defective version. And for whatever reason, half her eggs will have this one, half her eggs will have that. Half his sperm would have the defective gene, half his sperm would have the normal gene. And that's what, sex is all about. It's random and it causes variation in the population. So if this egg and if this sperm got together, now the baby would have the 2 defective versions. And guess what? If the child inherits 2 copies of the defective version, the child will develop fish odor syndrome. Yuck. Horrible. So sometimes it's no big deal. Sometimes it's a big deal, right? Like if we're talking about sickle cell anemia, or if we're talking about there are many disorders that are genetic in origin. All right. So offspring resemble their parents because they inherit genes from their parents. Genes are instructions set for biochemical, physical, behavioral traits. So some traits are controlled by a single gene. Okay, so heredity, the passing of characteristics from parent to offspring. Selective breeding. As humans, in our history, we have selectively bred for certain plants, for certain animals, like for example, ponies, okay? Reducing the size of horses. Once breeders recognized the existence of heredity, selective breeding, such as reduced size of horses, became possible. So we've been doing this for hundreds of years, right? Breeding our plants and animals. Here, there are certain traits, like here, for length in a cat, one gene can affect long hair versus short hair, color of cat. Are there multiple gene traits? Yes, of course there are. Think of height. People are not 6 feet tall or 4 feet tall. They can be all the way in between. So multiple genes can code for a certain trait. Okay, so now going to the father of genetics. The father of genetics is Gregor Mendel. Mendel. He says he learned about heredity by conducting experiments. Okay, before Mendel, okay, ready, laugh, ha ha ha, right? Before Mendel, this is the way we used to think. And this wasn't long ago, 1600s, 1800s. We used to think every sperm had a complete developed fetus in there. We know that's not true. Why do we know that's not true? If that was true, what would be the case? You have to think about it. Okay, then the babies would always look like dad, right? But we know that's not true. They get stuff from mom and dad, and Gregor Mendel helped explain that. So this is Gregor Mendel, and I'm going to have some videos that show a biography about Gregor Mendel and the example of his pea plants. Again, watching a video really is helpful. Gregor Mendel was a monk in 1800s, and he helped get rid of this idea, right? And the idea that both parents give information to the babies. And specifically who or what he worked with were pea plants. And he looked at flower color, pea shape, pea color, and he can cross-fertilize the plants. Now, what's nice about plants, remember the flower has the male and female gametes? So you can make true breeding purple plants, like purple, true breeding white plants. And you can fertilize the own plant to see what the babies are going to be like. And then when you work with plants, you could do, hundreds of babies to look at the patterns and the traits and what's happening. So here he crossed purple and purple, got all purple, crossed white and white, all white. Okay, so, but then what if you cross a purple and a white? They were all purple flowered plants. And he's like, whoa, what happened to the white? But then when he crossed two of these babies, they talk about the P generation, there's a parental, F generation, F1, first filial, you can think of offspring, and then here the second filial. When he crossed the two purple breeding plants, most of the time there were purple plants, but sometimes they were white. So then this gave him this idea of dominant traits and recessive, or dominant genes and recessive genes. So the dominant are what show, the recessive is what show if the dominant gene is not there. So he looked at pea plants and he thought of these ideas of both parents donate information, and the information, there could be dominant and recessive characteristics. And not only did he think about it, he did science. So he did experiments over and over and show that you can predict what the baby's going to be like. So this idea of probability. So if I go, right, they talk about the pea plants and what he did. All right, so 1800s, methodical experimentation, rigorous hypothesis testing to determine how traits were inherited. Segregation, this idea, you've got two copies of each gene, but only one copy in sperm and one in egg. The idea of dominant and recessive. So if this is one parent and this is another parent, the possible, through meiosis, the possible gamete production, through fertilization, the possible of the babies. Again, I'm going to have videos on this. It'll be very helpful. So Mendel said each parent puts into every sperm or egg a single set of instructions. The offspring receive two copies of the instructions for each trait. And it says the trait observed depends on two copies. So there's homozygous, heterozygous. We'll talk about that. So we now understand this, and now we can actually look at DNA, okay? And there are two things we use. There's a word called phenotype. there's a word called genotype. Pheno, think of physical. Pheno, physical characteristics. So what we can see. So purple plants is a physical characteristic. White plants is a physical characteristic. Genotype, think genes. What are the gene combos? So is it a dominant, right? Because you're going to get one gene from one parent, one gene from the other. So is it dominant? Is it dominant recessive? Is it recessive? Okay. So phenotype, the physical characteristic. This fawn has normal color. This fawn doesn't. Genotype, the actual gene combos in the body. All right. Okay. So from there, we can start predicting what's going to happen. And we have something called the Punnett square. So in lab, we're going to do Punnett squares. Plus, I'm going to have a video for you to watch on how to do Punnett squares. You need to know how to do Punnett squares. You will be held accountable to know how to do Punnett squares on the test. So in the book, they show you how to do them. I'm going to have a video on how to do them, and we're going to do them in class. So, and what it answers is, if we know one parent, and if we know the other parent, what's the likelihood of the babies being this or being that? So it says a Punnett square is a useful tool for determining the possible outcomes of crosses between two individuals. So let's say the father's pigmented, meaning he has color, and let's say he's homozygous dominant. Homo means the same, so it has two of the dominant genes. And let's say mother's an albino. Albino, she doesn't have pigment, and she's homozygous recessive. Homo, the same genes, but recessive to lowercase. We put the possible gametes of mom. She can give a little M in one egg, a little M in the other egg for her babies. Okay, so the parents are up here, babies are down here. Here's dad, and when he makes his sperm, half his sperm are going to have this gene, half his sperm are going to have this gene. And then we drop down and move across. If this egg and this sperm got together, this is the possible baby, the outcome. And it would be what we call heterozygous. Hetero means different. So there's a dominant and recessive gene. Or if this egg and this sperm got together, this is a possible combination. If this egg and this sperm got together, the possible combination. And if this egg and this sperm got together. So here, the parents' gene combos are here. The possible combinations to make the babies are here. And this is all the possible combinations of the babies. So again, in lab, we're going to have tons of practice on how to do a Punnett square. Also, please look at the video on how to do a Punnett square. So, probability, chance, plays a central role. What's the chance of this egg and this sperm getting together, or this egg and this sperm, or this egg and this sperm? Or it's chance, variation. And that's why sexual reproduction creates variation among the offsprings, the babies, and among the whole population. Okay. So it says probability and chance play a central role in genetics, right? So they talk about that. Test cross. What if we have a parent that shows the dominant gene and you don't know, do they have two copies of the dominant gene or one copy of a dominant and one copy of the recessive? We could do a test cross where we take the parent where we don't know, are they homozygous dominant? Do they have the two copies of the dominant gene, or are they heterozygous? We cross them with a known homozygous recessive, and depending on the babies, if all of them turn out pigmented, then we know this guy's homozygous dominant. But if half of them turn out dominant and half of them turn out albino, then we know this guy's heterozygous. So it talks about it in the book. Pedigrees. When we're looking at families, we can use what's called a pedigree. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and then continue in the next video.